Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
No, I can't hear you, actually. I can see you fine, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, sir? I'll try once more. Can you hear me now, sir? Can you hear us now, sir? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, sir. This morning's questioning is going to begin by questions from Miss Page.
Thank you very much.
Do you remember going into the witness box in Guildford Crown Court on the 14th of October of 2010?
Yes, I do.
Seema Misra was in the dock. She sits beside me now. Do you recognise her?
Yes, I do.
And the judge will have been on the bench, yes?
Yes.
The jury will have been opposite you, looking straight at you. Did you know that the reason that the jury are positioned in that way is so that they have the very best view of the witness, so that they can see and hear the witness in the best way?
I wasn't aware that that was why the court was arranged that way, no.
It's arranged that way because it was for them to weigh up your evidence, wasn't it? The truth of what you were saying.
I was aware that that was what they were trying to do, yes.
Do you remember taking the oath? Because that was the moment after which you were bound to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I remember that.
Was it just like the day job, just like supporting another ticket?
No, it wasn't. It was a very different experience from what I was normally doing.
Because you said earlier this week that you approached giving evidence in the same way, and that's why you just confined yourself to the narrow answers to the narrow questions that you were asked. Do you remember saying that?
I remember saying that, yes.
But actually you acknowledge it was very different to the day job, wasn't it?
Yes,
it will have felt...
Sorry, yes, it was.
I'm so sorry. It will have felt very different. It will have felt probably, I would imagine, quite extraordinary to be there in the witness box with Mrs. Misra in the dock, knowing that her fate would turn on what you said. Did it feel extraordinary?
It certainly felt different from normal, yes.
Did you know that the trial was also a test for Horizon?
I'm not sure whether I did or not.
By then, Horizon was an out-of-control monster. Hundreds of innocent people had already had their lives ruined to protect it. But you don't accept that, do you?
I was not aware of that at the time, no.
You told us yesterday, as far as I was aware, all the bugs had been fixed. That was my true belief at the time and still is. And you confirmed that you rejected the findings of the Horizon Issues judgment.
Yes, and I still stand by that.
Isn't the truth that you knew that Horizon was a monster and that it was causing harm?
No, that was not how I felt.
You hid it, didn't you?
No, I did not.
You answered a lot of questions yesterday about the Misra trial, which were effectively aimed at understanding why you didn't tell the jury about the monster. And you answered most of them with variations of, I realise that now. I should have done that. I realise that now. You had to say that, didn't you?
That's the truth. That's why I said it.
In fact, you knew what you were doing. You threw mud in the jury's eyes, didn't you?
I did not.
Well, Mr. Jenkins, in the 1931 film of Frankenstein, the monster is an assemblage of body parts from various corpses, and they're brought to life by stitching and bolting them together. I'm going to go through some of the body parts that were stitched into Horizon and see what you accept and what you don't accept. So let's start, please, with cash accounts. If I could ask, please, for EXPG 701, it's Professor Charles Scipione's expert report prepared for this inquiry. I say 7 zeros, hang on, 1, 2, 3, 6 zeros, 1, I'm sorry. Can we go to page 118, please? And what I'm going to take you to is his conclusions about his analysis of some 57,000 peaks, pinnacles, and kells. Now, if we go to 713, please, and I'll start a little way in, where it says that AI 376, end of the first line. AI 376, accounting integrity, caught my attention. Accounting integrity is a fundamental requirement of the LHITS, that's his acronym for the Horizon system. AI 376 was one of the final AIs to be closed. That's acceptance incidents, yes?
Yes.
And then at 716, so if we go down a little, it says, in January 2000, ICL Pathway states, if pressed, POCL, that's Post Office, would agree that AIs 342, 372, 376, 378, 218, 391 are closed, stroke incapable of further update. Their acceptance manager is leaving, blah, blah. Further in the same report, it states the outturn on AI 376 was 0.06 cash account discrepancies, exactly an order of magnitude better than the target. Now, did you know that AI 376 was ultimately resolved by an agreement that a small number of cash account discrepancies would in fact be acceptable?
I don't know that I knew that at the time. I do know that now.
A bit further down, 1719, Professor Scipione says this. Regardless, the fact that accounting integrity was a persistent issue in the national rollout of the Horizon system cannot have been the intention of the sponsors nor the goal of ICL Pathway. Do you accept that?
I'm not sure I quite understand what that means.
Well, what that means is accounting integrity was absolutely fundamental to an accounting system. And the fact that he saw, through his analysis, that it was a persistent issue in the national rollout, he says, well, that just can't have been the intention of those who were designing or commissioning the system.
I think it was the intention that there was accounting integrity in the system.
But it wasn't the intention that that would continue to be a problem holding up acceptance, was it?
I wasn't involved in the acceptance area and I wasn't involved in the accounting side of things at that time.
Is that right? Because I could take you to a document, and I will if I need to, which refers to resolving AI 376. It's a progress report by a fellow called Roger Donato from August 1999. Do you know Roger Donato?
Yes.
And it says there, shall I bring it up for you? It's, if we could go, please, to FUJ 307 9162. We see at the top, it says it's a progress report, and we can see it's prepared by Roger Donato, dated 20th of August of 1999. And if we go down, please, a little to paragraph 2.1, you're named here. It says, last week's activities. As part of the acceptance discussions, Pathway has documented a plan to carry out reconciliation processing in the TIP interface, documented by John Pope and Gareth Jenkins.
Yes.
Pathway is not committed to producing a tool to re-input lost transactions, brackets, though I expect it to remain on the agenda, acceptance incident 376, the same one we've just been talking about. So you may not have been centrally involved, but you must have known, Mr. Jenkins, that AI 376 was an acceptance incident about cash accounts.
I was aware that there were acceptance incidents. I'm not sure that I was that aware of the details, but I was aware that there was some work required in terms of adding further reconciliation into the system.
All right, well, we can take that down. So you don't accept that you knew that cash accounts were a persistent problem through the rollout, am I right?
I was aware that there were a number of problems, but I wasn't involved in the detail of the problems that were actually occurring. My role at that point was with the agent side of things.
Can we go back, please, to Professor Scipione's report? I'm sorry to have had to take it down. If we could go back, please. Do you need... No, it looks like it's EXPG601. And if we could go, please, to page 135. That figure in the middle of the page is his review of the peaks, pinnacles, and kells. And it's those that he's picked out where there is a bug causing receipts and payments mismatches. So in other words, cash account problems. And you see on the right, development code was the cause of 33% of them. And then we've also got various other causes to do with development, low-level design, development reference data, etc. If we go a bit further down at 18.119, please. Just there. Based on this data, I make the following observation. A significant proportion of these peaks and pinnacles, that's his abbreviation, had defect causes that were recognized as being related to the design or development of the Horizon system, 45%. This indicates to me that there were acknowledged bugs, errors, or defects in the Horizon system that were capable of giving rise to a payment and receipt imbalances. Do you accept what he says there?
I think this is referring to the very early days during the rollout of Legacy Horizon.
Well, it's over a number of years, and they were mostly from the relatively early years, but they go into the early 2000s. So we're not talking just about rollout, we're talking about going into the early 2000s here.
I think rollout didn't complete until about 2002.
Well, we can find out the exact dates on that if you like. But what we'll do, if I may, is ask you this. Do you accept that in those early years of Horizon, when people were being prosecuted, a significant proportion of the peaks and pinnacles which related to accounting problems were down to the design and the coding of Horizon?
I accept that that is what Professor Cipriani found out. I wasn't involved in things at that time, and I wasn't aware that people were being prosecuted at that time.
If we go a little bit further down, please. At 18.24. He says this about his review of the documents. I make the following general observations. Many of these peaks and pinnacles and kells seem to have been raised as a result of internal reconciliations. So that was your area, wasn't it, the reconciliations?
No, my area was to do with the harvesting of the transactions that had been generated as part of the reconciliation.
There does appear to be an earnest effort on the part of SSC to investigate these issues, identify a root cause, and mitigate future recurrences. The tickets show that different teams were involved when investigating these issues. in the majority of these peaks and pinnacles, it is not evident that the identified issue was resolved. In a majority of these peaks and pinnacles, the root cause is related to the horizon system. So the issues were not always resolved, Mr. Jenkins. You believed they were, you say?
I believe they were by the time I got more involved with the counter system a few years later.
And you told us that when you believed that all of these issues had been resolved, all issues had always been resolved, that was based on informal chats, yes?
Yes.
But if you chatted to any of the people involved in these peaks and pinnacles, and if they'd been honest with you, they'd have said, well, you know, Gareth, sometimes despite my very best efforts, I just can't get to the bottom of these accounting problems, and I just have to close the ticket without a resolution. Did none of them ever say that to you in these informal chats?
I can't remember that sort of discussion, no.
Did none of them ever say to you, when I'm stuck, I just have to inject transactions into the branch accounts to sort the problem out? Needs must. I know it's not ideal. I haven't really got to the bottom of the problem, but at least the branch can balance and I can move on to all the other tickets waiting in my stack. Did any of them ever say something like that to you in those informal chats?
I don't think it would be quite in that way. It would be a case of when there was a problem, you would need to make some adjustment to address the fact that that problem would happen, but you would then need to actually go and fix the underlying root cause of the problem. A good example of that is what we were talking about a day or two ago in terms of the receipts and payments mismatch. Not only did we have to actually fix the root cause of the problem, but then changes did need to be made to actually take into account the impact that it had on the branches.
The point is, Professor Scipione tells us that they couldn't always find the root cause of the problem, Mr. Jenkins, and they would just close the ticket anyway.
I understand that is what he says in his report, but his report was only on the very early days of the problem. I think things improved after that point.
All right. Well, let's just then think about that, when it might have improved. And what we'll do is we'll turn to what I will call body part number 2, which is remote access. Mr. Beer asked you some questions about Mr. Roll's evidence on this subject, but I don't think that he read out a section of it, which was Mr. Roll's explanation for why SSC used the ability to inject messages at the counter using the SPM's ID. I won't take you to it unless you need me to. What he said was this: without the correct user ID at the start of every message, then there would have been errors. Things wouldn't have been processed properly, from what I remember. So you wouldn't have gone in that way to make changes to the message store. So during the GLO, SSC witnesses did ultimately admit that they injected messages at the counter, didn't they?
Yes, I was aware of that.
And they must have had their reasons for doing that, rather than injecting them at the correspondence server, as you said you believed was the proper routine.
Yes, and I did have that conversation with John Simpkins as part of the preparation for the GLO.
And did he agree with Mr. Roll that the reason for doing it at the counter was because otherwise there would have been errors and things that wouldn't have processed properly?
No, because there was a mechanism that if messages were injected at the correspondence server, that an artificial user ID could be picked up for those messages, so that they would process correctly through the system.
But he admitted that sometimes they would do it at the counter, so there must have been a reason for that. Sometimes, presumably, doing it on the correspondence server, the proper-ish way, didn't work.
I didn't fully understand the details, the reason. There was one specific example that he did explain to me where it had to be done at the counter, and that was nothing to do with injecting a transaction. I can't remember the other examples that he gave to me, but as far as I was concerned, it was sufficient for me to know that there had been some injections at the counter to realise that it had been done.
Do you accept that one of the problems or one of the possibilities of injecting transactions is that there might be knock-on consequences, unintended consequences? You try to fix one problem by injecting a transaction, and then it causes another problem.
I accept that that's a possibility.
But you say that at the time you knew nothing about any of this. It was just a theoretical possibility.
That was what I understood, yes.
Let's look at your witness statement, your fourth witness statement, please, at page 33, paragraph 106. Now, just before paragraph 106, you had set out the explanation that you gave us here in the tribunal. In other words, what you've just said now, that you didn't believe that they were using the theoretical ability to inject at the counter until the GLO. But then in 106, you say this: in the years when Legacy Horizon was operational, i.e. up to 2010, my understanding from my colleagues was that on the rare occasions it was used, the default position was that substantive remote access was done at the correspondence server. During this period, I may have been told that substantive remote access had been done at the counter on one or two occasions, brackets, although I cannot now remember and cannot point to any examples of this. My lawyers have looked at the inquiry's database, but they have been unable to find any records where I gave advice about substantive remote access at the counter. However, I am aware that Anne Chambers emailed me and others in 2007 and referred to a possible case for, quotes, writing a corrective message at the counter in relation to a particular problem she was dealing with, and then you cite the email reference. My lawyers have not found any reply from me on the inquiry's database, and I'm not mentioned in the associated peak. It is difficult to say, therefore, what I thought or understood in 2007 about what Anne was proposing, i.e. whether she meant writing a message at the correspondence server, which would cause it to be replicated to the counter, or writing a message at the counter itself. I do note, though, that in her email, Anne refers to taking the question up with Tony Jamash or Gary, and it's going to say Blackburn of Pol, so she was clearly adopting an open approach to Pol about the possible use of substantive remote access. At this time in 2007, I doubt that I would have drawn or thought a great deal about any distinction between substantive remote access at the counter and substantive remote access at the correspondence server. You wouldn't have thought about it, Mr. Jenkins. You wouldn't have thought about the distinction which you now tell us is really rather important.
I agree with what I said in my statement, yes.
Is that a truthful account, Mr. Jenkins?
It is.
It's rather at odds, isn't it, with the account that you have wanted to give over the last few days, isn't it?
I don't think so.
Well, you've wanted to give a tidy explanation. You've wanted to say that you knew nothing about SSC injecting transactions at the counter until the GLO, didn't you?
My memory is that I thought that the transactions had been injected at the correspondence server because that was much easier for SSC to actually do things, and I couldn't see any reason why they would need to do things at the counter rather than at the correspondence server.
The truth is that you knew that injecting them at the counter was tampering with branch accounts. And you knew that if you admitted to that, it would not help your position, because you had been providing witness statements and giving evidence against Seema Misra, and yet you knew that your Fujitsu colleagues not only could but did tamper with branch accounts. Didn't you?
I didn't feel that it made any significant difference in terms of the accounts were being changed, whether it was done at the correspondence server or the counter. I just felt my understanding was it was normally done at the correspondence server because that was the simplest way of doing things.
You knew, Mr. Jenkins, as any sensible person would, that it was essential for the safety of prosecutions to have a tamper-proof evidential chain when presenting ARQ data in court. You knew that, Mr. Jenkins, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
And you knew, as everyone in SSC did, that the practice of injecting transactions at the counter was wholly contrary to being able to rely on Horizon as a source of truth. You knew that, didn't you?
I didn't know that.
And you needed to be able to produce 100% accurate records of transactions that took place at the counter in the branch, but this practice corrupted that, didn't it?
It didn't occur to me that that had an impact on things.
Failing to tell the court that you knew SSC were injecting transactions at the counter was failing to tell the whole truth, wasn't it, Mr. Jenkins?
I didn't think that at the time.
Let's have a look at the email which caused you to devise this tortured explanation in your witness statement. If we could go, please, to FUJ 001 42197. Anne Chambers, to you, 10th of December 2007. You say in your witness statement it was 2 others, but in fact that's not correct. 2 others are copied in, and you are the person it is directed to. Gareth, we have a problem with a branch where a single SC line was written for €100, £484, with no settlement. She gives some technical explanation in the middle of 2 RISP transactions. I suspect it's another oddity in the LFS counter code. Note, another oddity in the counter code, Mr. Jenkins. She evidently expected you to know that there had been more oddities, didn't she?
I don't recall this discussion. I don't recall that.
But they'd all been fixed, had they, Mr. Jenkins?
That was my understanding.
She goes on with a little more rather technical terminology, which most of us, I'm afraid, probably won't understand. But if we go down to her paragraph which begins, I don't know what to do about it. As it stands, when they balance, I think they will have a gain at the branch. If we correct the pole FS feed so it nets to 0, it will not be in line with the branch and will probably cause problems in future. This might be a case for writing a corrective message at the counter. But this has not been a popular approach in the past. I could try talking to Gary Blackburn or Tony Jamash. Do you have any bright ideas? So yes, she was planning to tell Post Office about it, but she knew, and you must have known, that they weren't going to like it. Do you accept that's clear from the way she said this?
Yes.
And did you know that when she wrote this up for them later in the OCP, the sort of mechanism that was used for approving these injections, she stressed that what she planned to do would not be visible to the branch, Mr. Jenkins. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
But the main point from your point of view is this. The words are in fact unambiguous, aren't they? She was proposing to write a message at the counter. She was not proposing to write a message at the correspondence server which could cause it to be replicated at the counter in the way that you suggest she might have meant in your witness statement.
I took that as a loose language. I took that as being a representation of doing it affecting the counter accounts rather than the back-end accounts.
Loose language, Mr. Jenkins,
yes.
Really?
Yes, so what I was thinking that to mean was that when you inject a message at the correspondence server, it has an effect on the counter as opposed to making a correction to the back-end system, which was the other option she was talking about in terms of changing things in Pulse app.
This is just a complication or an obfuscation which you have brought in to suggest that this email is somehow ambiguous, isn't it, Mr. Jenkins?
That is, I don't know what to say to that.
This email shows that you knew full well that Fujitsu colleagues not only could but did tamper with branch records, doesn't it?
I would not necessarily have taken that as being putting in an injection at the counter at that point.
And you must have consciously hidden that knowledge when you provided witness statements and gave evidence at Seema Misra's trial, Mr. Jenkins.
No, the concept of injecting messages was not something that occurred to me when I was doing that. Clearly that was wrong, but that I'd not thought about whether messages were being injected by the SSC.
All right, well, we'll move on to body part number 3, bad error handling in the EPOS code. Because there's another reason why you don't want to admit to knowing that transactions were inserted at the counter, because that's the unintended consequences point I was talking about earlier, isn't it? If there were unintended consequences as a result of inserting transactions, you wouldn't necessarily know about them. They were hidden by definition, yeah?
I don't quite understand where you're getting at with that.
Horizon might have been failing silently all across the system, mightn't it?
I don't believe Horizon was failing silently all across the system. I believe that when Horizon had failures, it was generating events. I accept the fact that it wasn't necessarily informing postmasters that there had been problems, but I believe that there were events there that were being tracked.
If there were unintended consequences, silent failures, they're what we might call known unknowns. You knew that they were likely to be there, but you didn't know how to find them to fix them, did you?
I believed that the event trails would be left and events would be picked up. There was a process in place whereby events should be picked up and investigated.
Well, let's just have a think about that in the context of the evidence given by Gerald Barnes, one of your colleagues in fourth line support, yes?
Yes.
I will try to give a fair summary of what he said on this to avoid the time that would be taken if we went through it in full. And I'm sure I'll be corrected if I've got this wrong. He said good error handling should be coded in from the start. Really bad error handling allows a process to, quotes, blunder on even when it has hit a problem. And that means that the error is silent, at least to the sub-postmaster at the time. What he said was, agreeing with you, it will leave a trace in the event log which a diagnostician would be able to read, but because the sub-postmaster is not alerted to the error at the time, no one would know where to look in the event log. Good error handling ensures that when an error occurs, the program aborts with a clear error message for the sub-postmaster to see. And that way, the process will not blunder on. And the reason that's important, Mr. Jenkins, is because if it does blunder on, it may create potentially incorrect results. And what he said is, it's far better to abort and create no results than to blunder on and create incorrect results that no one can identify because the error was silent. Do you see his logic, Mr. Jenkins?
I understand that, yes.
Later in his evidence, he said this: on the whole, the EPOS code did not have good error handling. In other words, there were a lot of silent errors, Mr. Jenkins. And then, even more than that, he said this: after going through an example of a process that had failed as a result of encountering transactions that the SSC had inserted, so the inserted transactions had caused a process to fail, he conceded that it was not possible to know how many other processes had failed silently as a direct result of SSC inserting transactions into the branch. So a capability, the inserting capability that was intended to correct accounting problems, could perfectly well have been causing many, many other uncountable numbers of other problems in the system when the processes blundered on and failed silently. What do you say to that, Mr. Jenkins?
I accept that it is a theoretical possibility.
Known unknowns. Let's look at it this way. What are known errors before they become known?
Well, and until they're known, they are unknown, obviously.
In some cases, Mr. Jenkins, unknown errors, which became known errors, had existed in the system for a long time before they became known, correct?
That is a possibility.
There were thousands of known error log entries, weren't there, Mr. Jenkins?
I'm not sure how many known error log entries there were. I don't know the volumes.
There were thousands, weren't there? You knew that.
I didn't know how many known error log entries there were.
And there's no way of knowing, Mr. Jenkins, how many unknown errors there were, are there? Is there?
My understanding was that, that the system was behaving well.
You're not a fool, are you, Mr. Jenkins?
I don't believe so.
You would have known of the potential unintended consequences of the SSC going off-piste, wouldn't you?
I wasn't aware that the SSC were getting involved on my understanding was it was very, very rare for the SSC to need to inject any sort of transactions. Yes, you've shown me an example here, but my understanding was that it was a very rare occurrence for such things to happen.
Body part number 4, the EPOS code itself. Professor Scipione assessed the examples of EPOS code that David McDonnell used to draw attention to the problems with the EPOS code back in 1998. I don't intend to call what he says up. A few quotes will do. Taken to example 1, Professor Scipione said, "This is terrible code. This is terrible code." He said it twice. "This has to be a joke. I mean, this has to be a joke because this is a ridiculous set of code." Taken to another example, it's just not the right structure, and it indicates to me that they don't understand what those particular structures are. Taken to another example. So either this is written by someone not so smart in here, or there's been multiple updates to this code. Either way, it's a bad example. When did you take over as the counters man, Mr. Jenkins? When did the EPOS code become your problem?
I'm not sure the EPOS code became my problem. My role was to do with actually designing at the high level the way that the counter needed to work in terms of impact, which would have been around 2004, 2005, something like that.
But you would accept, wouldn't you, that for the counter to work, it has to work on the basis of the EPOS code, yes?
Yes.
So when did the quality of the EPOS code become your problem?
Like I say, around 2004, 2005, that sort of time.
And do you say it had stabilised when you took it over?
I believe that it had.
What safeguards did you put in place to assess that?
I didn't do anything specific about that. My understanding was that it had been working well for some time before I got involved with it. I accept that there were these problems in the early days, which I hadn't been involved in specifically, but that there had been plenty of time then for things to have been sorted out and for it to be working stably.
Did anyone tell you in 2004 about this history?
Not that I recall.
So no one told you that it might be important to keep an eye on this beast which had these sections of dreadful code in?
Not that I can recall.
Did you have anyone assessing the quality of the fixes that were being put in? Under your watch, as it were.
I was relying on the competence of the designers and developers who were actually doing the detailed coding at that time.
So no one assessed their work to ensure it was done to a high standard?
Well, they were assessing each other's work. That was part of their process.
And when they were assessing each other, did anyone raise any concerns with you about the quality of the code or the fixes?
I can't recall any examples of that.
Do you say you can't recall, but there might have been some?
It is possible, but I can't recall. My understanding was that it was working well by that time.
How many bugs were being addressed on a weekly basis?
I can't remember.
Tens, hundreds, thousands?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Who was your line manager, Mr. Jenkins?
It varied a lot over the time.
What was their job title? What was their role?
Design manager, chief architect, there was that sort of role.
What was your reporting line to the board?
What do you mean by the board? Do you mean the post office account board or the Fujitsu board or whatever?
The Fujitsu board. What director were you sitting under?
I've no idea. This would have been about sort of 7 or 8 levels above me.
So, in other words, a very indirect reporting line then to all the way up to the board. Is that right?
Yes.
How would anybody have raised any problems to the board if they were concerned about the quality of the EPOS code and the fixes that were going in to try to make it better?
I've no idea.
No whistleblowing procedures that you were aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Body part number 5, Mr. Jenkins, hardware failure. Would you accept that from the year 2000, you knew that when hardware failed and was swapped out, there could be problems with recovering missing transactions?
Yes, I was aware of that. But I was also aware that it didn't happen very often.
How were you aware of that?
Again, informal conversations.
Informal chats, I see. People said to you in informal chats, oh yeah, no, we don't have recovery problems after hardware failures very often. That's not something that happens very much. Is that right?
That was how I understood things.
I see. Well, I won't need to take you then to one of the pinnacles from the year 2000 in which you yourself dealt with a recovery problem and in which you said this. This was another example of recovery having gone wrong after a box swap. Do you take my point from the way I emphasised the word another example?
Yes, I understand what you're getting at there.
You personally knew that there were plenty of examples of recovery problems after box swaps, didn't you?
It depends what you mean by plenty. Clearly, there were. It had happened more than once.
You were aware of persistent problems with synchronization between counters within a branch after recovery problems. Sorry, after a hardware failure. You knew that they were a persistent problem, didn't you?
I knew that they had been in the early days, but I believe the problem you're referring to did get fixed.
Let's look at what you said about hardware in your Misra evidence. Your third statement for the SEMA Misra trial, you attached the Horizon Data Integrity Report to it, didn't you?
I did.
And in fact, what you did was a formal process that we lawyers refer to as exhibiting your report. Did anyone tell you what exhibiting means?
Just attaching a document rather than cutting and pasting it into the formal statement.
It makes it part of the evidence, Mr. Jenkins. Did you understand that?
No, I didn't understand that.
You told Mr. Beer that you did this, you exhibited this report because you thought it gave a useful summary of the sort of hardware failures that could occur, that could possibly cause loss of data.
Yes, I accept that.
But you conceded that you'd in fact done nothing at that stage to find out whether there had been any hardware failures at Mrs. Misra's branch.
Yes, I accept that.
The fact is, your data integrity report reassures, doesn't it? It's intended to give comfort that there won't be a loss of data if there is a hardware failure. That's the point of it, isn't it?
It says that in normal circumstances there won't be, but it does accept the fact that potentially there could be.
The message really, by attaching it, was that you, Professor Loughlin, you can rule out the idea that hardware failures might have caused discrepancies. That was the point of attaching it, wasn't it?
No, it was to show that that there was a possibility of it happening, but that it was a very rare possibility.
On Tuesday, when Mr. Beer first asked you what you knew of the duties of an expert, you said, "I just thought I had to answer the questions I was asked," truthfully. Yeah?
Yes.
And you relied on that a lot in your answers. When Mr. Beer asked you why you didn't reveal the complete picture, you would say, well, you just answer the questions that you were asked. Yeah?
Yes.
And that also applied to the way you approached your witness statements for the Misra trial on the whole, isn't it?
Yes.
But that's not what happened here, is it, Mr. Jenkins? The question that you were supposedly answering was this: I have been requested to comment on the issue raised by the defence in relation to a post office called Calendar Square, Falkirk, that was mentioned at the Castleton trial. No one had asked you about hardware, had they, Mr. Jenkins?
I can't remember.
Well, they hadn't, had they? It was not one of Professor Scipione's questions, was it?
Sorry, not Professor Scipione.
I'm so sorry. Professor McLachlan.
I can't remember.
Well, you were answering a series of his questions in that statement. And the one that you had just answered when you attached this report was about the Calendar Square bug. He had not asked you about hardware, and he had not asked you about data integrity. He had asked you about the Calendar Square bug. Attaching your data integrity report there was an attempt, wasn't it, to answer an implied question which flowed from all of his hypotheses. That implied question might have been something like, could any system failures have affected Mrs. Misra's branch accounts? That was a sort of implied question from all of the whole piece of work that he'd been doing, the hypotheses he'd been putting forward. Do you accept that?
I'd not thought of it that way.
No, you'd not thought of it that way. Well, the report that you attached was specifically about data integrity. So were you answering an implied question along these lines? How do we know that the data underpinning Mrs. Misra's branch accounts has integrity? Was that the question that you thought you were answering?
I can't remember what the exact circumstances of what I thought I was answering.
What you did here, in truth, is you exhibited this report to your witness statement as if it were providing the wider picture, showing what Horizon was really about. That's what you were doing, wasn't it?
I can't remember, sorry.
You were stepping outside the narrow task of responding to Professor McLachlan's hypotheses and questions, and you were purporting to give the wider picture. Don't worry about data integrity. This is a good system. The data is sound. The system couldn't have caused the discrepancies. That's why you exhibited it, isn't it, Mr. Jenkins?
I can't remember exactly why I decided to exhibit it at the time.
Even though you told us during the course of this week that the report had been created for a narrow purpose, only intended to respond to the narrow hardware failure scenarios that Post Office had asked you to deal with. And yet you then exhibit it to a witness statement. Why did you do that, Mr. Jenkins?
I can't remember.
This was a deliberately and knowingly deceptive, reassuring report to exhibit to this statement in this context, wasn't it?
I'm not sure that it was reassuring particularly. It did indicate that there were circumstances in which data could be lost.
You were throwing mud in Professor McLachlan's eyes, weren't you, Mr. Jenkins?
That was not what I was trying to do.
And ultimately, that meant you were throwing mud in the jury's eyes.
That was not my intent.
Let's just remind ourselves of the question you were asked which you didn't answer. It went like this. Do you know whether there are any known problems with the Horizon system that Fujitsu are aware of? The truthful answer to that question would have covered all the body parts, wouldn't it? Cash accounts, remote access, tampering, bad error handling, silent faults across the system, the EPOS code, the terrible code, hardware failures, persistent hardware failures, recovering transactions that were lost, failing to recover transactions that were lost.
That was not how I understood the question to be.
That was not how you understood the question. No. There was even a bit more, wasn't there? Because there was also the true bolt-ons, the Bank of Ireland cash points. They were a catastrophe, weren't they?
I don't have any real knowledge about the Bank of Ireland cash points and what the issues were with those.
The Horizon lottery terminals. They were a problem in Mrs. Misra's branch, weren't they?
I was not aware that there was any problems with the lottery terminals.
Bureau de change. That was another disaster area, wasn't it?
I'm not aware of any specific problems with Bureau de change.
You hid all these issues and problems when you gave evidence against Seema Misra, didn't you?
No.
And you did that even though she was standing right there in the dock in front of you.
I don't believe that I deliberately hid anything.
Let's just take a quick final look before I finish with how you reacted after she was convicted on the strength of your evidence. We've already seen how after the trial you were jokingly rather pleased with the mistaken title of professor, so I won't go to that. What I'll go to is this, FUJ, please, 0015 6418. This is in the February of 2011. It's from you to Penny Thomas. Now, if we just scroll down a bit, it's a reply from her. She says, OK, Gareth, did you watch the Inside Out programme last evening? So let's go up to your reply. Yes, I did. Do you remember that Inside Out programme?
Not in detail, no.
Do you remember that it starts with Devinder Misra, Mrs. Misra's husband, who sits a little further along from me, in tears because his wife is behind bars?
I don't remember that, I'm afraid, sorry.
This is what you said about it. I was pleased that Fujitsu wasn't mentioned. Post Office have a significant problem, exclamation mark. I also note that the screenshots were of HNGX, Horizon Online, and not Horizon. I remember chatting to Mr. Misra outside the court, exclamation mark. Do you have anything to say about that, Mr. Jenkins?
My feeling was then and is now that the issues to do with this are down to the way that the Post Office has behaved rather than actually faults in the Horizon system. And that, I think, is what was behind what I said there.
And yet, you told the judge that you being a Fujitsu man had no impact on your evidence.
I don't believe that it did. I believe that I told the truth as I understood it at the time.
I was pleased that Fujitsu wasn't mentioned.
Yes?
You were a Fujitsu company man, doing what Fujitsu needed you to do. Protect the monster.
I didn't think it was a monster.
Let's go finally to one last document, please. FUJ 0015 6460. And if we go to the bottom of page 1 and we zoom in, please, on paragraph 8A. This is you providing some content for your appraisal. Oh, I should have shown you the date. I'm so sorry. It's March of 2011.
Yes.
So this is your performance appraisal. 8A. I spent some time with Pol supporting a series of court cases where Pol was prosecuting ex-postmasters for theft, where the postmasters were claiming a problem with the system. Cases were A, West Byfleet. For this case, I spent some time analysing a year's worth of transactions and explaining to the defence expert how Horizon worked. I was required to comment on the defence expert's reports and spent a week at the court during the trial, including a full day in the witness box. And if we just go down a bit, being examined and cross-examined by the barristers. The defendant was found guilty of theft, and Horizon was given a clean bill of health. You knew that the Misra trial was a test case for Horizon, didn't you?
I realised that afterwards. I'm not sure if I did at the time.
You knew that your role was to help get that clean bill of health, wasn't it?
My role was to tell the truth.
You tailored your evidence accordingly, didn't you?
No. I attempted to answer as best as I could the questions that I was asked.
Never mind whether a byproduct of protecting the monster was that a woman was sent to jail, Mr. Jenkins. Never mind that.
I'm sorry for what happened to Mrs. Misra, but I feel that was down to the way that the poll had actually behaved and wasn't purely down to me. I clearly got trapped into doing things that I shouldn't have done, but that was not intentional on my behalf, my part.
Thank you, sir. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Page. We'll break off now and we'll resume again at 5 to 11.
Sir, good morning. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
I think Mr. Steen is next to ask questions.
Yeah.
Mr. Jenkins, I've got a number of questions for you, but can we travel back in time to the development of the Horizon system? You were part of the team that was working on what became the Horizon system. That's right, isn't it?
I was involved with the agent side of things rather than the counter side of things at that time.
Okay. Now, from your knowledge of that, I want you to help us with something that Mr. Coombs That's Mike Coombs. He's the former Horizon Programme Director, ICL Pathway, and he gave evidence on the 1st of November 2022. I want to ask you about something he said and see if you can help. He was asked this question: were you aware during your time working as Programme Director that Post Office Counters Limited were intending to place reliance upon data recorded on Horizon to support the bringing of civil and criminal proceedings against sub-postmasters and office managers suspected of fraud? Mr. Coombs' answer was this: I didn't have the faintest idea that they were considering using information, and I had no idea at all they were considering taking the step of prosecuting members of their own organisation. Now, if we go back in time to the work that you did do that at least contributed to the overall system at that stage, and then perhaps the beginning of the Horizon period in, round about, 1999, 2000. At that time, were you aware that Post Office was intending to place reliance upon the data recorded on the Horizon system to support the bringing of civil and criminal proceedings?
I was aware at some time, I can't remember at what stage. It was probably in the early 2000s, but I'm not sure exactly when.
Right. Were you aware at that same, perhaps early stage, that the Post Office was using the data from the Horizon system in order to conduct audit visits? In other words, from the point of view of sub-postmasters and mistresses, essentially raids on their premises? Were you aware that it was being used in that way?
I can't remember at what stage that I got involved in that sort of detail, but it would be probably sometime in the early 2000s, but exactly when, I can't remember.
So at some point, this was to your knowledge, and you think in the early 2000s?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you help us with whether, to your knowledge, that either Fujitsu or the Post Office made sure that the design parameters of the Horizon system were up for the task of supporting civil actions and prosecutions?
Sorry, I can't help you with that.
Well, is there anything to your knowledge that was done to make sure that the Horizon system was good or fit for purpose? The fit for purpose being the support of proceedings against sub-postmasters, mistresses and people working in their branches.
I believe I heard someone saying that they'd taken advice as to whether the audit trail was something that could be used in court proceedings, but that's sort of second, third-hand type knowledge. But exactly when I acquired that knowledge, I'm not sure.
Right. So from your work, since before 2000, and then you were still consulting for Fujitsu in 2022, is that right?
I think my last actual consultation was just before COVID in 2000, but I was still on a retainer till 2022.
Right, okay. So for the period of time that we're talking about, roughly, certainly over 20 years, you're not aware that there was a, let's make sure that this Horizon system is up for the task of supporting prosecutions, civil actions, or indeed properly attending upon people in audit. You're not aware of anything that was done to guarantee that the system was good for that. Is that fair?
That's probably fair.
Now, we know from your evidence and from your statements that you were very much part of the litigation support system. I think you called it in your statement prosecution support or something similar to that.
Yes, I mean, I can't remember the exact term that was used. But
something like prosecution support seems to be what you say.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Terence Austin gave evidence in October of 2022, and he was asked questions, which I will paraphrase, which were about what training events and training material was available in relation to the question of support for litigation, prosecution support, okay? So let me take that in bits for you. Were there any training events, opportunities, hours in the day set aside, parts of maybe a weekend or a day set aside for training purposes to do with the prosecution support job?
Not as far as I was concerned. I don't know what the people whose full-time job was to do to support that, people like Penny Thomas and so on, but I wasn't aware of any training.
When you say not aware...
I didn't have any training.
Right,
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah. No, I've had no training in that, right. And I realise now I should have done, but it didn't occur to me at the time that I was lacking that.
Were you offered any such training opportunities? Opportunities to learn about systems in litigation, either civil litigation or in criminal litigation. Were you offered such opportunities?
No, I wasn't.
Now, you've been asked in your statements about whether you were provided with guidance, standards or protocols or something similar that relates to investigations and prosecutions. And as we understand your statement, I think it's your third statement. I don't need to go to the paragraph. I have a note of it. Your third statement, which is WITN 00460-300, paragraph 35, you say this: you don't recall reading any of them at the time. Now, the them you were referring to there was guidance, policies, protocols about giving evidence, okay?
I'm not sure that I was aware that any such things existed.
Right. In a way, you're anticipating my next question.
Sorry.
Which is, no, that's fine. Are you saying that you were not provided with any of these manuals? Is that what you're saying? Nobody brought them to your attention?
No.
No? You didn't ask to see any of these things?
No, I didn't. I realise now I should have done, but it didn't occur to me at the time.
And who, within the Fujitsu organisation that you worked for, should have been responsible, in your view, for providing you with such materials?
I assume it's the security team or possibly some of the lawyers that were behind that, so to speak. I'm not sure there were direct lawyers responsible for the security team, which I think is another one of the issues that I concede looking back with hindsight.
And within the security team, I've asked you questions about training opportunities, events, manuals, guidance, policies, all of those possible opportunities to enhance your understanding of what you were about. Who within security should have provided you with such opportunities?
I guess the manager of the security team that varied over time. The one name I can remember is Brian Pinder, but there were a number of security managers over the time.
Now, in your statements, you discuss the question of whether the peak, pinnacle, or KEL system was effective. And this is from your fourth statement, I think, WITN 00460-100, paragraph, I think it is 47, page 13. You state this. And again, if I summarise this wrong or badly, then I'm sure that someone will correct me. You say about the peak pinnacle system that used properly, you believe that they're a good tool, but only as good as the users handling it.
Yes, I accept that.
You stand by that, do you?
Yes.
Okay. So as far as it goes, the peak, pinnacle, and you include within that the KEL system was okay, but you can't speak to the quality of those people that were operating it. Is that fair?
Not quite. The KELs I had very little to do with. I saw KELs as being primarily something to support the help desks rather than something to use at the back end. As far as the peaks were concerned, then that was down to whatever anyone put on it. I believe that the guys in the SSC were competent and were doing a good job of things. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. And you recall being asked many a question by Mr. Beer about this question of belief, things that you were told,
yes,
and information that you have been supplied.
Yes.
So on this question of belief that the people within the system, operating the system and putting the entries for the peak and pinnacles in and the like, what did you have to say in the fact that they were doing it well? As an example, quality assurance reports to you saying that actually that there are these issues, we're addressing them. This is regarding the inputting of data. What did you have to provide a measurement of how well they were doing it. Did you have any of that sort of material?
No, I didn't.
And just moving that on slightly further, what quality assurance systems were embedded within the system to assure the quality of the peak pinnacle process? So what was there by way of, I don't know, comparison to other similar systems, that type of comparative quality assurance?
I don't know is the simple answer.
You say in your first witness statement, WITN 00460-100, page 13, paragraph 47, as regards the system itself, in terms of the peak pinnacle system and the, I suppose, the operation of the horizon system, you say this: I have no point of comparison to offer the inquiry because your work has only been essentially on the horizon system. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Right. Were you aware of any industry standard or benchmark being applied to the Horizon system?
There were standards in particular areas. So, for example, when we interacted with the banks, we had to conform with banking standards and things like that. But in terms of the overall system, then no.
If we bring all of this together, that essentially what appears to be the situation is that at no time were you either given or did you ask for an overall measurement of the quality of the Horizon system, its operation through from the inputting of materials or data onto the peak pinnacles. That just simply wasn't something that you had. Is that fair?
Yes, I think that's probably fair. I'd not thought of it that way before, but yes, I accept what you're saying.
Now, sub-postmasters, mistresses, their branch managers, their employees, you've, unless I misunderstand what you've said about your work for Fujitsu, you've worked in this country?
And I've worked abroad for brief periods as well.
Brief periods. And you've lived in this country for essentially your life?
Most of my life, yes.
You're as familiar with the post office branches as then many people are. You know, you go to different parts of the country. You see the small branches in small villages. You're familiar with that?
I see that there. I'm not sure that I visit post office branches that often. I've probably visited them more often the last 2 or 3 years because the banks have closed down and I have to use a post office for banking money.
Yeah. And you're aware that the small places sometimes have a grocery side to them and operate as more of a general store?
Yes, I am
and
aware.
You're aware that they are very often, not entirely, not always, but very often that they're run by families working and living effectively in the same premises?
Yes.
Yeah. You're aware that there's therefore a reliance upon the post office, I suppose, that from the postmaster mistress point of view, for the post office to treat them fairly. I'm sure that you would think that that should be what was happening.
And that's what I would expect to happen, yes, but I appreciate now that that isn't what has happened.
I want you to help us with one aspect of the way that sub-postmasters, mistresses, and indeed their branch employees were dealt with by the post office. Were you aware that the branches were told that they were liable contractually for any shortfalls, and they had to make good those shortfalls? Were you aware that that was the consistent message that was sent and given to sub-postmasters, mistresses, and people working in branches?
I'm certainly aware of that now. I'm not sure exactly when I became aware of it.
Well, that was going to be my next question.
Sure.
When did you become aware that sub-postmasters, mistresses, people working in branches were told, look, if there's a shortfall, you've got to pay up and make it good? Help us understand when you knew that.
I think I was aware of that when I was involved with the prosecutions, but I'm not sure exactly when I became aware of that.
Right. You understand that people working in branches of the post office aren't necessarily computer experts. You know that.
Oh, yes.
And you know that the data given to people working in branches, as it's been described by many witnesses, relatively limited.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by relative.
Well, they don't have the full access to the system that you enjoyed.
My understanding was that if someone was being prosecuted, then they would be given access to the data. I now appreciate that they weren't always, that didn't always happen.
So the answer is yes, you are at least now aware
Yeah.
that the people in branches were not given the full access to the system that you enjoyed.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I certainly accept that now,
Right.
yes.
So this pressing of sub-postmasters to pay up for any shortfall, did that concern you, Mr. Jenkins, when, as you say, you knew that, you think, when giving these statements? Do you make me think, that doesn't seem quite right?
I didn't understand it quite in those ways at that time is the issue, I think.
Well, you either understand it, Mr. Jenkins, or you don't you? You either go, right, I understand that people are being told to pay up for shortfalls irrespective of fault, or I don't know that. You seem to be saying a minute ago that you did know that.
It's not something I'd really considered seriously at the time, and I accept with hindsight I should have done.
Well, you said repeatedly that in your evidence, and I'll come to this again a bit later, that you don't think that the post office handled sub-postmasters fairly. But you knew that the post office was pressing people to pay up, irrespective of fault. That seems to be something that was in your knowledge. How do you ignore that?
Well,
Jenkins?
I'm not sure what... I'd not taken it as being without fault bit of it is the bit that I'd not really sort of fully understood and comprehended at the time, I think is what it really comes down to.
So let's try and work out what you're saying. You seem to be saying that whilst you were giving statements supporting the prosecution role of the post office, that you had some awareness that people were being told to pay up for shortfalls, but you didn't know perhaps how that was being explained to the people in the branches? Is that what you're saying?
I was looking... my approach was looking at how Horizon was working rather than the effect on postmasters, and I appreciate that was wrong and I should have been more concerned about the impact on postmasters, but my role I saw was more of a technical one, and that's where I was coming from.
But do you regard yourself as being an uncaring person?
No, but I deal better with systems and things than people.
Well, that doesn't mean that you...
I'm not saying I'm uncaring at all.
Yeah.
But
despite...
I just wasn't thinking things through like I should have done.
Did you turn to anyone and say that, well, I'd like to know a bit more about what's going on in these branches?
No, I didn't.
Is it perhaps more likely to be the truth that none of the work that you did for the post office in supporting the prosecutions had even a glimmer of a care about the sub-postmasters and their branches?
I'd just not be looking at it that way. I appreciate that I should have done, but I was just looking at things from the point of view of how I thought Horizon was operating.
Turning to a different topic. We know that...
Before you do that, Mr. Steen, can I just ask, so far as you can recall, Mr. Jenkins, were you ever brought into a case before a decision to prosecute was taken? Or was it, as far as you can recall, always the case that you were asked to assist once a decision to prosecute had been taken?
As far as I'm aware, decision to prosecute had always been taken long before I got involved. I can't say that, I can't be absolutely certain that was the case, but from what...
But that's your recollection?
That's my recollection, yes.
All right. Sorry, Mr. Steen.
We know that that on occasions, school call handler scripts would advise postmasters to turn off the system. I can give a reference if we need it and go.
I've seen such scripts now. I wasn't aware of the scripts at the time.
No. Now, the problem with turning off the branch system is it disconnects to the rest of the network. Is that right?
Yes, but with Legacy Horizon, the whole system was designed to be able to operate when turned off from the rest of the network anyway. And certainly in the early days, it was expected that most branches would be off the network most of the time.
And the idea is that when actually relinked, in other words, turned back on or power restored, whatever it is, that the systems would catch up with each other. That was planned.
Yeah, indeed.
But that it's not a 100% guaranteed system. It can lead to problems with data transfer.
No, I would dispute that. I would say that the design of the system was that it would catch up. If it was just a simple case of turning the box off and on again, then the data would all be caught up in time, and that was one of the main reasons why the Repose product was chosen by Post Office.
There's some suggestion that there are different bits of the Horizon system. That, in other words, that if you have a part of the system working in Leeds, that might relate to servers that relate to that area. Were there different operational areas for Horizon?
I'm not quite sure what you mean. With Legacy Horizon, we had 2 data centres in Wigan and Bootle, and all the systems in the UK connected through to one or other of those data centres using the BT telephone network in general, though I think there were some differences in Hull because that's not on BT, and there are a few obscure offices that use satellite systems rather than the BT network when there wasn't suitable BT coverage. But the systems did, in general, connect through to the main data centres.
Right. So we've got, if I understand what your evidence is about this, the Legacy Horizon, you've got essentially 2 different servers?
No. We had two separate data centres really for disaster recovery, so that I think the example that was used, if a jumbo jet landed on one of them, then the other one could carry on doing the work. Obviously, that never happened. So the idea was just to make sure that we had 2 distributed data centres sufficiently far apart that they were very unlikely to both fail at the same time.
Would bugs, defects or errors affect every counter on Horizon, or could some affect only a limited number of counters?
It depends on the bug. So yes, there could be issues to do with what was happening in the background on the boxes and things like that could cause timing type issues and so on. And those were the more difficult things to actually understand what was going on. But in general, my understanding was that the system was working well in the majority of branches. The problem has been is that in a few branches things didn't always operate correctly.
Why would it be possible for particular bugs, errors and defects to affect a particular group of branches and not the entire system if, going back to your evidence a second ago, it's operating as one system?
To do with issues of timing and just minor differences in terms of how the hardware operated or the sort of sequence of activities. Different postmasters would do different sequences of activities and others, some type faster than others and things like that. So it's timing type issues and things like that. So things that are basically unpredictable.
So correspondence, in other words, similar things happening at a similar time could mean that particular branches all doing that at a similar time could be affected. Is that what you're trying to say?
I think most issues that occurred were affecting sort of just one or two isolated branches at a time, rather than a group of branches. I think what you're trying to suggest is that there may have been a geographical grouping or something like that. I'm not aware of issues that would affect things like that.
We know some bugs affected larger numbers than one or two. We know.
Yes. And particularly after a new piece of software got rolled out, there may be some initial teething problems that would get sorted out in a few days after that.
Right. So there's no geographical suggestion that it would affect a particular group of people, say in a particular county or something like that.
Not that I can think of.
It's more about the way that the system itself operates and timing issues.
And the sort of activities that were being carried out. So there might be specific transactions that could cause issues. And
as regards software updates, you've mentioned in your statements that you believe that the Post Office was aware of those software updates?
Yes, okay. They had to sign them all off.
And that those software updates included references to the bugs that had been fixed by them, that sort of thing?
Yes.
Right, okay. Yeah. We've had the benefit, when I say we, I've been instructed by firm of solicitors have been involved with these issues now for well over a decade. Howe & Co. solicitors. We've had the benefit of some pro bono advice, as allowed for by the inquiry, in relation to computer expert advice, okay? One of the parts of that advice that sticks with me is that in the software fixing world, you fix 20 bugs, errors or defects, and 19 more crop up. Is that sort of a familiar IT expectation that fix one bug, others crop up, because necessarily it affects the system as you go forward?
I certainly accept the fact that fixing a bug can introduce other bugs. I don't think I would go as far as say fix 20 and you get 19 new ones, but I understand where you're getting at.
You understand the point and the problem? Yeah. How open was the Post Office in recognising bugs, errors or defects to the Horizon system, in your mind?
I'm not quite sure what...
Or did they seem to be interested, the Post Office? Were they welcoming? Did they go, thanks for telling us?
I wasn't actually involved in that direct communication with Post Office, but I think one of the problems is that, from what I've realised now, looking back, the Post Office wasn't fully joined up, in that there were some people in Post Office who were well aware of these sort of issues, but there were clearly other people in Post Office who weren't.
Outside of Fujitsu software, I include within that the, if you like, the jigsaw puzzle that was the Horizon system made up of other software from other companies. So outside of the Fujitsu software, what else? What other hardware or telecommunications could cause data to be lost or corrupted in your mind?
I think it's a case of I'm not quite sure I understand what you're getting at. In terms of the branch accounts, then the branch accounts were all done based on the Horizon system within itself. There were then back-end systems that Post Office then used for running their back-end business, and Horizon was responsible for feeding data into those back-end systems.
Hardware problems, could that cause difficulties with branch accounts? In other words, the terminals themselves, that was capable of causing difficulties?
I suppose it could have done, but yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Now, we know from your evidence, we know from other parts of the evidence in this case, that there obviously were these bugs, errors and defects. We know about the support system at Fujitsu and so on. Help us understand a little bit more about the way that there was communication to the sub-postmasters, mistresses and their branches. Was there a bug of the day system, or a watch out for this could affect your system type notification from Fujitsu?
Not that I'm aware of.
The people that
communication with the branches, I think, was in general post office's responsibility rather than Fujitsu's.
Well, was there anything done within Fujitsu to provide the information in the way that I've suggested? In other words, that we think it'd be a jolly good idea if the people that are operating their small businesses were told about, watch out for this problem. Was there anything like that being done by Fujitsu?
I'm not aware of anything like that. But I wouldn't have been directly involved in any such communication.
It would have been a good idea, wouldn't it, Mr. Jenkins?
With hindsight, yes.
You've stated a number of times, and I've touched on this in the questions I've asked of you, about the fact that the post office didn't support or help you think in your mind the sub-postmasters. I'll give you some quotes. Your fourth witness statement, WITN 00460400, you state that the NBSC has for some sub-postmasters not really helped, and in some cases the advice made things worse.
I understand that. Looking back, I wasn't particularly aware of that at the time, but it's something I've learnt over the course of the last few years. And
you've said yesterday, just in the 2:32 in the afternoon, that the NBSC didn't handle referrals very well. Referrals being from the helpline at post office to Fujitsu.
That's something I now understand, yes.
The problem, which is that if the post office isn't handling their helpline very well, that means that sub-postmasters can be saying, look, I've got a problem, I don't understand what's going on. The system just doesn't work, or something like that. I can take.
And I understand that, and I understand now that that is exactly what was happening, and I wasn't aware of it at the time.
And it wasn't. This information was not getting through to the support line at Fujitsu. You understand that now?
I understand that now. Yes.
That's a problem, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed.
Well, explain why it's a problem, Mr. Jenkins.
Because then people would. When there were genuine problems in the system, then we weren't being informed about them and therefore couldn't actually fix them.
Now, the support lines at Fujitsu were not only just dealing with the problems that were let through this post office filter system to Fujitsu, but they were also seeking within the helplines to identify faults of themselves that would come to their own attention. Is that right?
As I understand it, the distinction was that the Fujitsu help desk was primarily dealing with hardware issues, and business issues were to be dealt with by NBSC. But if NBSC identified something as being a potential software issue, then it would be passed over to the Fujitsu help desks. As I understand how the system was supposed to work, but I wasn't actually involved in that side of things then.
The very beginning of your evidence, Mr. Beer was asking you questions about whether there was a kind of this is my summary of the questions he was asking you, but whether there was essentially a big book, a list of problems that you could consult.
The nearest thing I think we had to that was the known error log, which was there to support the Fujitsu help desks, but I don't think that was available to the NBSC. But I'm not 100% certain about that.
This failure in communication between Fujitsu and the post office, this inability, it seems, to reconcile a helpline system that is run by the post office with the operation of the Fujitsu system. How on earth could that come about, Mr. Jenkins?
I don't know. That wasn't an area that I was particularly involved in.
Paragraph 51 of your witness statement, the first statement, WITN 00460100, you say this. You're describing your impression that the post office did not provide enough support to sub-postmasters. who are struggling with the system. And that your impression was that Post Office blamed the sub-postmasters rather than conducting further investigations. I think it may be useful if we in fact go to that paragraph. Paragraph 51, WITN 00460-100. So the paragraph starts with in relation to what Pol could have done differently.
I mean, this part of my statement is looking back on how I see things now, not how I necessarily saw things at the time. So this is looking back in 2023 rather than what I was aware of at the time that I was working with Fujitsu.
My impression is that Pol did not provide enough support to sub-postmasters when they were struggling to use Legacy Horizon and Horizon Online. Instead of investigating the issues that sub-postmasters reported and trying to assist them, my impression is that Pol blamed them instead.
Yes.
How did you come to this view, Mr. Jenkins?
From what I've heard with the inquiry and from what I've learnt from the group litigation that took place in 2018, 2019. It's stuff that I've learnt after my involvement with the design of Horizon. So this is looking back rather than what I knew at the time.
And your impression is that Pol blamed them instead? Blamed them in what way, Mr. Jenkins?
Back to what you were saying before, that if money was lost, then they were asked to pay up.
Now, I'm going to ask you about a particular email that was sent in the 16th of May 2013. I'll ask it to go on the screen, please. Hopefully I've got the right reference. Pol, P-O-L, 000-29587. Now, if we scroll down this email, please. Yeah, okay. Now, this is from Alwyn Lyons. Essentially, it says at the top there, Paula, that would be Paula Venables, here are my speaking notes for your call with Alice this afternoon. Now, Ms. Jenkins, I know that you were not privy to this email. I'm going to ask you about one particular section, okay? Now, you see as you go down the bullet points that it gets to the good news is bit, and then we read across. Good news is that where we have found two bugs, when we have found bugs since New Horizon, they've been detected and put right with no loss for the sub-postmaster. And Fujitsu now monitor the suspense account for any such problems, all right? So this is an email in May of 2013. You've given evidence regarding suspense accounts, and you, in fact, when giving evidence, I think on the first day, you asked Mr. Beard to be careful about the way that the term suspense accounts were being used. All right, so let's see if I get this right. The first pre-impact program suspense account were branch suspense accounts. Are you okay with that description?
Yeah.
After impact program, there's then the more centralised suspense accounts. Is that again right?
There were still suspense accounts in the branches.
Okay. Help us with the way that the system operated. Fujitsu, is this correct, had access to the post office accounts. Is that right? So could look at what was in the accounts.
I'm not quite sure what you mean. I mean, Fujitsu was able to look at any data that was going through the system.
Right. Well, it's saying here that from May of 2013, Fujitsu now monitor the suspense account for any such problems.
I don't understand what that means. I don't understand what is being got at by that.
What it might mean is that the theory was that Fujitsu should keep an eye on suspense accounts to monitor the rise of money being put into suspense, which might correlate to problems within the system.
I don't think that's what's behind there. I don't know what that is referring to. There was an issue that was discovered in 2013 to do with some old data from a suspense account that came forward a year or so later. I think it was being referred to as the local suspense issue that affected 12 branches on 14 occasions, and that was a problem that was detected in 2013, so it could be a reference to that.
All right, well, I'll move on. Now, you've been asked a number of questions about the what you described in your statement as the boilerplate parts of statements that you gave. Now, I'll take you to a particular paragraph of your statement, WITN 00460300. So that's the third witness statement, paragraph 102. So WITN 00460300, paragraph 102. Right, thank you very much. So paragraph 102 there is from your statement, you're saying this. You're aware there's a question in the inquiry as to what the two boilerplate or standard paragraphs that appear at the very end of the standard Fujitsu witness statements actually meant. Okay, that's what you're talking about. And you've been asked a number of questions about that. I don't want to repeat those questions, okay?
Okay.
What I want to do is just understand what's going on here a bit more. Now, you said essentially that this didn't and wasn't meant to mean that the Horizon system was working at any particular level of integrity. That wasn't what this was about. That's what you're saying.
I can't understand how the people who are signing these statements will be in a position to say that.
Right, okay. And the people that you're talking about that signed these statements include you?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So the people that signed these statements that containing these paragraphs, you're saying you can't understand how they could sign such declarations to warranty the integrity of the Horizon system?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Fine. All right. Now, when you're saying that that's something you don't understand, help us a bit more on that. Are you saying that these two paragraphs you assumed were about the laptop or the computer that you were writing things on, or about the audit data production? Are you saying that you assumed that, or you knew that? Which?
Assumed.
Assumed, right, okay. Now, help us understand a little bit more about what you mean about this word assumption, then. You know that giving statements to courts are important things, yes?
Oh, yes.
You can affect those people's lives that you're giving statements about, those people living in the small businesses in various parts of the country, yes?
Yes,
You knew that. And you know that statements contain a declaration at the top saying that this statement is true to the best of my knowledge and belief.
Yes.
And you make it knowing that if you say anything in it that is effectively untrue or wrong, you may be opening yourself up to prosecution. You know that that's what's on those statements, don't you?
Yes.
And you know you have to sign a statement at the bottom of each page, yes?
In some cases, yes.
Right. Well, you know you have to sign statements, don't you, Mr. Jenkins?
I'm not aware. I believe there were some statements that were served in my name that weren't actually signed by me.
Okay, I'll come back to that one in a moment. So when you are making a statement that's got this important declaration at the top saying that if you say something in the statement that you know not to be true, that you could be prosecuted, how does that reconcile itself with making an assumption about what these two paragraphs mean? You don't really know, you're just sort of guessing a bit.
I I see now that it doesn't necessarily reconcile, but I'd not thought that through at the time.
And just understanding your evidence, I think this has to be true. You are saying that you would never have signed paragraphs that warranted the working integrity of the Horizon system.
I was happy that the Horizon system was working correctly. I wouldn't have said that it was working correctly everywhere in all particular circumstances, but I didn't think that's what I was being asked to say.
Which is why you're saying you'd have never signed these paragraphs to have meant that.
Yes.
And you don't think anybody else should have signed paragraphs to say that the Horizon system was absolutely tickety-boo at all times.
Well, I mean, certainly the people who... these paragraphs were coming from the statement that was used to exhibit ARQs, and the people who were providing those statements didn't have any knowledge of how the Horizon system was working. All they knew was how the ARQ extraction process was working.
Do you find it a little odd that other people may say that they also assumed that this just meant that they were saying that the system producing the statements was working okay? Are you finding it a bit odd that everyone's making the same assumption without checking with each other?
I realise now that I should have done more investigation and tried to understand more of what was being said, but I didn't.
What about having a natter with somebody like Ms. Chambers and saying, what on earth does that mean? Do you think, why are we signing this?
I didn't do that.
And lastly, let me just touch, just very briefly before I finish, on this entire question of your status as an expert.
Yes.
Giving evidence as an expert. You're saying essentially you know now that it has a different status within the legal proceedings.
Yes.
Being that as an expert are allowed to give an opinion about matters to which they have expert knowledge. That's one of the big differences about being an expert. You know that now?
I understand that now, yes.
Yeah. Because otherwise a factual witness, a witness that just says, I don't know, I saw a particular person outside of a shop at a particular time, they're not allowed to give an opinion as to what they think is going on. They've just got to say what they've seen. Do you understand the difference?
I do now. I
Right.
don't know that I did fully understand those differences.
Now, through the period of time that we're talking about, there's Google, yes?
Yes.
And we should add that there are other search engines.
Yes.
Did you ever, as an example, Google the question of giving evidence in court proceedings?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever speak to somebody else within your team and say, well, has anybody ever looked up what we should be doing in court proceedings?
No, I didn't.
Did
Again,
you
I
ever
should have
ask?
done.
Yes.
Again,
Did
I
you
should
ever
have done,
ask for
but I didn't.
advice
Yeah.
about it?
Well, I did seek some advice from David Jones, for example, back in February 2010, and there was no suggestion that I needed to do anything special at that time.
So the odd situation that you were in from your point of view, which is giving evidence in court proceedings, serious evidence affecting people in post office branches, you didn't look it up? You didn't speak to other people in your situation, like Ms. Chambers, about it? Is that right?
Correct.
Do you think you could have done more to help people in this situation?
I clearly appreciate that now, and I appreciate that I did get things very wrong, but it was done through ignorance rather than maliciousness.
And looking back in relation to your employer, Fujitsu, what should they have done better?
They should have given me some training in terms of what they were asking me to do.
And about the system itself, what should they have done better? You must have thought about this, Mr. Jenkins.
Sorry?
You must have thought about this. What should Fujitsu have done better?
I think the system as a whole was working well, but it clearly wasn't working perfectly, and I don't think anyone ever suggested that it was.
What should Fujitsu have done better, Mr. Jenkins?
Probably not put me in the situation that I was put in.
Lastly, Mr. Jenkins, it was in the end of 2020 where, by chance, I happened to be the person that was presenting the evidence that related to the Clark advices in the Criminal Court of Appeal. So,
Right.
End of 2020, when that happened.
Yes.
That's when the Clark advices then started to become part of discussion, generally,
Yes.
in relation to post office matters. Now, you were on retainer until 2022.
Yes.
You're saying essentially that you weren't doing very much work from about 2020 onwards, but you were still theoretically consulting if possible, if
Yes.
they wanted you to.
Yeah.
So after the time when the Clark advices started to become part of discussion within post office inquiry matters as it became, did Fujitsu bring you to whatever office and say, Mr. Jenkins, there's been this advice written by a chap called Simon Clark that says that you've not told the truth or the whole truth to court proceedings. Did Fujitsu bring you in and ask questions of you about that?
I was certainly sent a copy of the Clark advice at the time, and after the Horizon trial, I was brought in to discuss with Fujitsu lawyers to give my view as to what had actually, the outcome from the Horizon trial that had happened in 2019, and that was the reason for my last couple of consultancy meetings in early 2020.
Was there an internal inquiry by Fujitsu into the question of your integrity, your honesty, your probity, your credibility when giving the statements going back in time for the post office?
Not that I can remember as such, at least not one that involved me.
You've mentioned, and I'm grateful to Mr. Enright, you mentioned that there were statements that were served in your name that weren't actually signed by you.
Yes.
Are those statements that you've seen during the course of your preparation for your evidence in this hearing?
I can't remember exactly which ones I've signed, which ones I haven't, but I'm not using that as an excuse. It's just that it's been pointed out that some of the statements that have been shown to me do not have my signature on them. I'm not saying that I don't stand by what they say. I'm just saying my understanding is that some of them were served before I'd actually signed them.
Language is important. Your understanding is that some were served, it seems, without them having been passed by you. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying some statements were served in court proceedings that did not go via you? Which?
I believe that I saw all the statements. I'm not. What I'm saying is I haven't necessarily actually put my physical signature on the bottom of each one of them. I'm not trying to distance myself from the statements that were put in my name. All I'm saying is that I hadn't necessarily actually physically signed them all.
That it, Mr. Steen?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Maloney, is it appropriate to take our second break now, and then you can have your question time after that break?
Yes, please, sir. Thank you.
Fine. So we'll start again at, 12:05. Is that all right with everyone?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you very much.
I'll just wait for the room to settle down before handing over to Mr. Maloney.
All right.
Yes, it's Mr. Maloney.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beer. Thank you, sir. And Mr. Jenkins, I've 3 topics to deal with you, please.
Okay.
Just to start with a few general questions, then a very short section on Mr. Grant Allen's case, and then the most lengthy section on Mr. Misak's case.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So just the general questions to start with. As your services were utilised in more and more prosecutions, did you become more familiar with the types of documents prepared for the purposes of criminal proceedings, such as witness statements, case summaries, defence statements, and so on?
I got to recognise a bit more about the type of documents that I would be shown. So yes, I guess that's a fair comment.
Yeah. Well, it's a question rather than a comment. But
Right. Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Okay. Yes. But
entirely.
yes. Yeah.
And did you become more familiar with the language used by lawyers in such documents?
I'm not sure that I thought much about the language used. I was just looking at them in terms of just reading them in the same way as I would any other sort of document.
All right, thank you. But did you become more familiar with how cases might be conducted, the issues in the case, and how the defence might seek to resist the prosecution case, and how the prosecution might seek to rebut what the defence was saying?
I'm not sure is a simple answer to that. I've not really sort of done any sort of comparison as to how things have changed over time, particularly.
Did you, just to try and put it in more simple terms, did you actually see, right, this is the point the prosecution are making, this is what the defence is saying to it, and this is how the prosecution might rebut that?
Yes, I suppose so.
Yeah. And when you were involved in a case, writing a report, meeting with counsel, did you ever consider how a bad result in the case, a negative outcome on the issues in the case, might have negative implications for Fujitsu?
No, I don't think I was considering that particularly. I was just trying to address the questions that I was being asked.
Right. So you confined yourself really to answering the questions that you were asked.
Yes.
And may I just, the answer may be obvious because of the answer that you've just given, but just to repeat it, when you were involved in a case, writing a report, meeting with counsel, did you ever consider how a bad result in the case, a negative outcome on the issues, might affect or have negative implications for Post Office?
No, I didn't really consider that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now I'd like to ask you just a few questions about Grant Allen's case. He's one of the core participants represented by Hudgell solicitors. And do you have a recollection of this case from having read the papers in preparation for your evidence?
I've read stuff about that, yes, as part of the preparation, yes.
So I'll just try and give a quick summary and then you see if there's anything that you disagree with.
Okay.
So in January 2013, Mr. Allen pleaded guilty to a single count of fraud by false representation. When his branch had been audited, there'd been a shortfall of about £17,000. And Mr. Allen told auditors that they would find a shortfall in excess of £10,000. He told investigators he'd inflated the balance in the branch in order to cover losses he'd experienced, and he thought that the shortfall was associated with problems he encountered with hardware not functioning properly as he moved over to the new system. Do you remember that?
I didn't remember it was to do with moving over to the new system. I thought it was to do with moving hardware from one branch to another, one location to another.
It's absolutely. Now, can we look at poll 89427? That's poll 89427. And can we please go to the final page to start with? So that we can scroll up to the penultimate page and keep going and keep going. Thank you. And it's an email from Rachel Panther to you on the 31st of January 2013, and it follows on really in time from an email that Mr. Beer asked you about yesterday afternoon when all the cases were set out and your generic statements were going to be served in relation to those cases.
Yes, I'm familiar with those sort of emails.
Yeah, entirely. So I'll read it if I may. Hi, Gareth, hope you're well. Just to let you know where we are with a couple of cases. Grant Allen, this case is concluded now, so you will not need to attend. I'll deal with what's said about Mr. Ishak here because that will save time when I come to ask you about Mr. Ishak. Ishak, having served your report, the defence have queried it and are claiming that Ishak had to make false entries in order for the figures to reconcile as the Horizon system kept malfunctioning. The trial is listed for the 25th of February 2013 for 3 to 4 days. Please could you make a note in your diary as you'll be needed to attend to clarify our position with Horizon. And if we could go down, thank you. Our barrister has asked if you could read the defence case statement attached and make a list of your initial thoughts on the assertions that he's making. We may need you to add a few of those comments into your report so that each issue is addressed. I've attached a copy of the case summary for your assistance. And then it deals with the case of Sefton and Neild, which we don't have to spend any time on, and the usual salutations.
Yes.
We see from that you were told that Grant Allen's case had concluded.
Yes.
And Ms. Panter refers to having served your report, which of course follows on from reference in the previous email that we saw about expert reports.
It was my generic witness statement, I believe.
Absolutely, which was described as an expert report from you.
I thought of it as being an expert witness statement, but I won't quibble the terms.
Okay. You reply in due course to this email at 17:01, so not long after. And if we could go up the page, please. And yes, there we see. Rachel, I'm fine, thanks. Hope you are too. Thanks for the update. I'll make a note of the dates. No problem with them at present. I'll have a look at the Ishak stuff and get back to you. When do you need anything? I'm tied up all of next week, so I may not be able to get anything formalised until the week of 11th of February. Is that okay? In fact, you were much quicker than that, as we'll see.
I found a bit of space in my schedules during that week, but yes. Absolutely. I was trying to set expectations.
Yeah. Look, it's this I'd like to ask you about, Mr. Jenkins, if I may. You go on to say, what exactly was the conclusion of the Grant Allen case? I was particularly concerned about his allegations regarding the problems caused due to refurbishment and comms issues being the reason for some of his losses. Was anything said publicly about that? We were quite concerned that this might set a precedent. And then you refer to the case of Mr. Patel and Kim Wiley to conclude the email. Who was we there, Mr. Jenkins?
I guess it was we Fujitsu. I'm not 100% sure, but that would be. It wasn't a royal we, if that's what you mean.
Well, that was one option. Although you'd said I in the previous sentence, which rather precluded it being a royal we.
No.
So it was Fujitsu who were worried. And why would Fujitsu be worried about a precedent being set in a case?
I think it was. There was a suggestion that a refurbishment had caused a loss, and I'd not been given the opportunity to investigate what was actually happening. So I just wanted to sort of clarify exactly what the outcome was as to whether it needed further investigation.
Because if a refurbishment had been shown to cause a loss, or it had not been challenged that a refurbishment had caused a loss, that might cause problems for Fujitsu.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. And specifically here, there is a reference to precedent, that this perhaps could cause problems in future cases.
Yeah, I guess so.
Were you involving yourself, as it were, in strategy at this point, Mr. Jenkins, and not simply answering the questions that were asked of you?
I didn't see it that way.
Was there a risk of reputational damage to Fujitsu if this had gone wrong?
I suppose there was a risk there, but I was more concerned in actually understanding what had actually happened in that particular case and what the outcome was.
And what the possible detriment was?
I suppose that may have come into it.
And you were looking ahead with the interests of those who'd been your effective employers for the whole of your career?
Possibly.
Can I move on, please, now just to look at the case of Misak? And could we please put up the case of Hamilton, which has the inquiry URN POL 20 113278. That's POL 20 113278, and it is paragraph 214. And there it is. And this is what the Court of Appeal said about the case of Ishak, Khayyam Ishak, in the judgment Hamilton and others. And paragraph 214, and it goes through to paragraph 218 for the facts. On the 7th of March 2013, in the Crown Court at Bradford, before his own Judge Potter, Khayyam Ishak changed his plea to guilty to the theft of £17,863. On the 22nd of April 2013, he was sentenced to 54 weeks imprisonment. So what that means is it's a sentence of immediate custody, not suspended. 215. The defence challenge to the Horizon system was clear from a very early stage in the proceedings. Mr Ishak's solicitor had informed Post Office of the issue and of the defence's intention to instruct an expert at an earlier magistrates' court hearing on the 25th of July 2012. A defence statement of 29th of August 2012 repeated the defence challenge to Horizon and made a series of disclosure requests targeted at the Horizon system. Mr Ishak denied theft, but admitted to altering items on Horizon out of necessity in order to reconcile the accounts and due to the system malfunctioning. The defence sought any information relating to the malfunctioning of the Horizon system generally, such as the outcome of any inquiries or investigations or any internal memoranda recording malfunctioning, and the data produced by Horizon. The defence repeatedly sought disclosure in relation to Horizon and instructed an accountancy expert to analyse the accounts. Post Office produced evidence to demonstrate the integrity of Horizon and relied in particular upon the involvement of Mr Jenkins, who provided witness statements and contributed to a joint expert report. In a served witness statement dated 15th of January 2013, Mr Jenkins defended the integrity of the Horizon system. On the 5th of February 2013, the defence made a formal application to a judge for further disclosure on Horizon. The application was refused. On 20th of February 2013, the defence served an addendum defence statement which alleged Horizon malfunction and set out reports of technical faults which Mr Ishak had made to the Horizon Help Desk. He'd also made reports to the National Business Support Centre about shortfalls and discrepancies. Paragraph 219, which is the next paragraph, simply deals with Post Office's response to the appeal on behalf of Mr Ishak and points out about the absence of analysis. At the 5th line, the fact that Mr Jenkins provided witness statements in itself suggests that Post Office did not disclose the full and accurate position regarding the reliability of Horizon. There was no proof of natural loss as opposed to an Horizon-generated shortage. Now, so that sets the factual background, as it were, to the questions that I'd like to ask you, Mr Jenkins. But just to add a little more, which I think you may recollect of it from the terms of your witness statement, that Mr Ishak had pleaded not guilty and was due to be tried on the 25th of February 2013 in the Bradford Crown Court. But although the trial started, his counsel was not well, and so the trial was adjourned to the 6th of March of 2013.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. And then on the 7th of March, he was rearraigned and pleaded guilty. And in fact, you'll remember that because you went to Bradford, didn't you?
On both occasions, I was in Bradford, yes.
Absolutely. You had served a report in the case, and as it says in the judgment in Hamilton and others, Mr Ishak had served a defence statement setting out his defence to the case and explaining why he took issue with the prosecution case. And he'd also commissioned an expert report from Beverly Ibbotson supporting his defence. And you had a number of emails with Beverly Ibbotson, and did you meet her briefly as well?
I met her briefly outside the court on the first day of the first trial.
Yeah.
But I'd not seen anything to do with that report until that point.
Yeah. In fact, you got it very late in the day, didn't you?
I got it on the first day of the morning of the first day of the first trial. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when at court, did you meet the prosecution team, trial counsel, Mr. Mark Ford?
I believe I must have done.
Yeah. Yeah. The purpose of your email exchanges with the defence expert Beverly Ibbotson prior to the start of the trial, just prior to the start of the trial, was that in order that you could discuss each other's potential evidence and produce a joint report that identified any points of agreement and identified any differences between you.
That's what I now understand, yes. I'm not sure it was actually explained to me at the time. I was just given the report and said, have a look at this, what do you think about it?
Right.
Or words like that.
Because you did produce a joint.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I think it was called a joint report. Basically what it was Miss Ibbotson's report with some comments interleaved with it that as to whether I agreed or disagreed with what she was saying. And on the whole, I agreed with most of what she was saying.
Entirely. And we'll come on to have a look at that shortly. But you, as you say, your views in relation to the separate aspects of the report were incorporated into Miss Ibbotson's report. And in bold and italics.
Yes.
And we'll see that. But I first of all want to ask you about the defence statement. Now, the essence of Mr. Ishak's defence, as is made clear, was set out in his defence statement. And for these purposes, can we look at a document which contains quotes from his defence statement and your comments upon those quotes? You're aware of this document?
I know. I recognise your description of the document. Yes.
Yeah, and this is Paul 30's 59602. That's Paul 30's 59602. Thank you. And so, we can see that this is the 1st of February of 2013, 9:31 in the morning. This is when you're essentially commenting on this document.
Yes.
Yeah. We see the introduction explaining what you've been asked to do. And then, so this is about 5 weeks before trial. But then if we could move up slightly so that we can see the full section on defence case statement. Thank you. So this is the first quote, as it were, from Mr. Ishak's defence statement, reproduced in this document for you to comment on.
Yes.
Yeah. And we see the defence case statement sets out in general terms the defence of Kai Misak and the principal matters upon which issue is taken with the court. It's served for no other purpose. And it carries on 5 paragraphs introducing the defence case statement, which you say all of the above appears to be standard legal preamble and doesn't require any comment from me, reflective of your familiarity with documents of this nature.
Well, it was more a case of I didn't think there was anything technical there, and I assumed it was something to do with the legal side of things that I didn't really fully understand. And as I understood it, I was expected to comment on the technical aspects rather than the stuff there.
The next section is general nature of the defence case. And we see that as the heading. And here we see the defendant is charged with theft of £21,168.64. Again, no comment. I've not seen any of the details as to how this figure was arrived at. Note that I've been involved in a previous case where the figure was disputed and was able to show why the defendant had misunderstood the way the system operated due to the way they were trying to hide the loss. And then at paragraph 7, if you could scroll up a bit, thank you. The nature of the defence in relation to this allegation is there was no appropriation of monies. The Post Office Horizon software/hardware system had in the past on numerous occasions malfunctioned, causing difficulties in recognising sales, receipt and stock figures. The defendant had reported the same to the Post Office helpline seeking assistance, but little or no successful assistance was afforded to him despite the said requests. And your response here is, if the defence can specify some examples of this, I'm happy to investigate them. However, I would contend that the system doesn't malfunction without leaving some trail to indicate what has happened. Without examining the logs, it's difficult to be any more specific. I think there are 3 possibilities here. The defendant has not understood the way the system operates, and that the difficulties in reconciliation have been due to the defendant's lack of understanding of the system and the way at which it operates. The defendant has stolen the money. There is a fault in the system. There is no evidence of a fault in the system, and the fact that the system operates without issuing 12,000 other branches supports this fact. So I would suggest it's one of the other two. I can offer no opinion in identifying which is the case. The Post Office helpline is run by Post Office Limited, and so I'm unable to comment on the assistance that it did or did not provide. The system was faulty at times, though, Mr. Jenkins, wasn't it?
I was aware of, at that stage, one fault that had occurred after the pilot of Horizon Online, because this case was to do with Horizon Online, if I remember correctly, and that was the receipts and payments mismatch issue that I think we discussed a day or two ago, and I was confident that we knew the scope of that and which branches that had actually affected.
Yeah, and it could cause problems that had to be rectified. The system could do that. You knew that from Horizon Legacy, and Horizon Online was relatively new, and you knew that any computer system could cause problems which had to be rectified.
Yes, but as I was saying there, that as we were talking about Horizon Online in this case, that I wasn't aware of any specific problems that would have affected that particular branch.
And you had not at this stage examined the data.
And I make that clear at the time.
But you were nevertheless venturing an opinion that it is one of the other two, without having looked at the data.
But I qualified that as saying that I'd not looked at the data.
You qualified it before you came to that conclusion, though, didn't you? You first of all said, I've not looked at the data, but it's one of, I think there are three possibilities here, you say. And the two that it must be are that the defendant must have misunderstood the operation of the system, or the defendant was a thief. But you could not say which. And that was before you'd looked at the data.
That's what I was saying. I had no reason to think that there was a problem with the system at that time.
Without having looked at the data.
I'd not been asked to look at the data and hadn't been given the data at that stage.
Yeah. You say, note that this is a common complaint. What was a common complaint?
The common complaint was that by then I was understanding that people were complaining about the NBSC helpline not being very helpful.
Was that part of your expertise?
No, it wasn't.
If we could move to 4, please, on this, which, if we scroll down to Roman 4, the defendant contends that upon all core data from the Horizon hardware/software system used by the Post Office auditors being provided to him, the defence should be able to demonstrate that all sales receipt and stock figures properly reconcile. You say, not sure I understand this. Is he asking to see the detailed logs to do his own analysis? If so, I would suggest that he may need some help in understanding them, and in the past I've worked with defence experts to provide that understanding. You realise that the matters that were being raised were the proper subject of expertise.
Yes.
Yeah. Not something that an ordinary person could be expected to understand.
It was a case of explaining what the logs actually meant, yes.
Yeah. And then could we please go down to the disclosure requests? Yes, and that's at 10, rather 11 to 2, 11 Roman 2. And it reads, all material to the knowledge of the prosecution in existence, whether in the hands of the prosecution or third parties, that reasonably supports or is reasonably capable of supporting the contention that the Post Office Horizon software/hardware system has proved to be unreliable and or inaccurate and or unstable and or susceptible to malfunction and or otherwise prone to the production of erroneous results. And you reply, I am not aware of any such material other than previous such challenges. You were aware of material, weren't you, that showed whether or not it had been fixed, that actually the Horizon, Post Office Horizon software and hardware system has proved to be unreliable and or inaccurate?
I didn't have. I was aware that Post Office had been building up material of previous challenges, but I didn't have a complete set of that, and that's really what I was referring to.
You knew about the problems during rollout.
But the problems during rollout would have not been relevant because I'd found out at what time this branch had actually moved from Legacy Horizon to Horizon Online, and it wasn't operating on Horizon Online during that trial period.
So you're saying this is only, you've confined yourself to Horizon Online here, and that you've not considered this as a general request about Horizon software and hardware. You've read Post Office Horizon Online software and hardware system.
That is how I was taking that.
Yeah. You knew all about the problems during rollout. You knew all about the problems with riposte.
But this case was to do with Horizon Online and nothing to do with riposte.
Yeah. But this was an invitation to set out all you knew, really, Mr. Jenkins, wasn't it?
I didn't see it that way.
And then down to Roman 4, please. We see there the full results, whether provisional or final, of all internal and or external investigations and or inquiries and or reviews, whether instigated by the Post Office or any other body, into the correct functioning of the Post Office Horizon hardware/software system. And you reply, again, I do not have this information, but presumably Post Office Limited does. I'm aware of an ongoing investigation into this area by an independent third party, which is due to report in a couple of months' time. When you, and that was the second site investigation,
yes.
Was it? Yeah. And when you met with Beverly Ibbotson or emailed her, did you tell her about the ongoing second site investigation?
No, I didn't know that I needed to.
Having seen what Mr. Ishak was getting at in this case, meeting with the expert, did you not feel that it might be appropriate to tell her about what was going on with Horizon at this time, when she was essentially raising accountancy-related problems in relation to Horizon?
I can see now that maybe I should have done, but I didn't think of that at the time.
And then finally for this, at 5, Roman 5, any internal memoranda and or guidance notes and or other material dealing with the correct or incorrect functioning of the Post Office Horizon hardware/software system. And you say, I don't believe that I have anything specific that comes in this category. I assume that this is being addressed by Post Office Limited. Didn't you know about the known error log?
That was not, I'd not interpreted that question as meaning that.
Well, that identifies incorrect functioning of the Post Office Horizon hardware and software system and gives fixes, doesn't it?
Yes, I accept that now, but I'd not seen that as being what this question was about.
Yeah. And did you appreciate that Post Office, so far as the answers you've given in this document are concerned, did you appreciate that Post Office would rely on your answers?
I don't think I heard anything further from when I passed this response back to, I think it was Cartwright King rather than Post Office as such, and I didn't get any further feedback in terms of progressing this any further that I can remember.
Because we know, as we've seen from the terms of the Hamilton judgment, that a disclosure request was made by Mr. Ishak on the 5th of February, that's just 4 days after this, which related to that material, and the application was refused by the judge. Now, we don't have a transcript of that disclosure application, but do you appreciate now that on the basis of what you said, Post Office would be able to say that it had no material to disclose?
I'm not sure that on the basis of what I said that they would be able to say that. Because what I'm saying here is that Post Office probably does have material that I didn't have personally, and therefore it was up to them as to what they should be disclosing or not.
What material were you thinking of, Mr. Jenkins, that Post Office
I didn't
would
know
have?
what they had.
Well,
all I'm saying is I didn't think that I had anything that was relevant.
Well, you're saying that Post Office probably does have material that I didn't have personally, with your words, and therefore it was up to them as to what they should be
Well, I think I think that's what I'm trying to say here. Again, I do not have this information, but presumably Post Office Limited does.
What did you suspect they had?
Well, I was aware of the work that Helen Rose had done a few months earlier in terms of cataloguing previous challenges to Horizon.
But wasn't that something that you were aware of as an expert that you should be pointing out here in terms of the answers to it?
That was not my material, that was Post Office's material, and when I looked at that I didn't recognise a lot of the information in there, so I felt the Post Office had a better picture than I had. Why
didn't you say, presumably you'll disclose the Helen Rose report? You knew about it, Mr. Jenkins.
Well, I assume the Post Office knew about it as well, because they were the ones who'd shown it to me.
Well, precisely. But you were the person who was tasked with being the expert in this case, Mr. Jenkins, and you knew about the Helen Rose report, but you didn't tell anybody.
I didn't know that I was expected to tell anybody about it. I thought Post Office had that information and they could tell people about it.
In any event, matters progressed and the defence served an expert report from Miss Ibbotson, and as you've explained, you had email exchanges with Miss Ibbotson and you met her briefly at court.
Yes.
Yeah. Could we now please have a look at Miss Ibbotson's report and the contributions of you that are contained therein, the joint statement?
Yes.
And this is POL 30 59927. And we can see there, it's dated the 26th of February 2013. It's the report of Beverly Ibbotson and the joint statement of Beverly Ibbotson and Gareth Jenkins. Now, I assume, Mr. Jenkins, that you read this report.
I did at the time, yes.
Yeah. I'd like to take you to particular sections of it, if I may. And first to page 4 and paragraph 1.10. Now, there's a part of Beverly Ibbotson's report that says here, I understand that my duty in providing this report is to the court, and this report is addressed to the court and not to those instructing me. Did you read this as written by Miss Ibbotson? And
that was part of her statement. I was commenting more on the technical aspects that came later.
No, of course. I'm asking you, though, whether or not you read that.
I probably read it, yes.
Yeah. Did that inform your understanding of the section in your generic statement where you said, I understand that my duty in providing this report is to the court?
I don't think I'd related the two together at the time.
Right. Then, at page 4, please, but it's same page, sorry, 1.11. In accordance with Part 33 of the Criminal Procedure Rules and the practice directions supplementing it, I set out my expert's declaration at the conclusion of the body of this report. Did it never occur to you that you might be subject to the same duty?
It hadn't until it was pointed out to me much later.
When you read that, in accordance with Part 33 of the Criminal Procedure Rules and the Practice Directions supplement it, I set out my expert's declaration at the conclusion of the body of this report. Did you not wonder what Part 33 of the Criminal Procedure Rules was and the Practice Directions supplementing it?
No, I say, this was all... The first time I saw the report was the previous day. I'd spent most of the evening analysing a whole load of data to be able to address the technical issues, so that's what I was concentrating on at this time.
Can we please go to page 5, please, which the next page, and to 2.3. Now, this reads that, and this is really the body of Ms. Ibbetson's report, dealing with the issues in the case. What had happened was that essentially there was an audit. Mr. Ishak was suspended, and there was a difference between the shortfalls from when he was suspended and a later
Yes.
check.
Yeah.
And it reads that, and of course you could see the obvious point that was being made was, how's this balance changed if Mr. Ishak, this shortfall, how's it increased if this shortfall has, if Mr. Ishak's been suspended? And it reads, a repeat balance snapshot exercise was carried out on the 11th of February 2011, 3 days after the defendant had been suspended, at which time the shortfall was identified as being £21,213.79. And then what you say is, GJ agrees that these exhibits are clearly different, but is unable to explain the differences at this point. GJ points out, however, that the difference is only £45.15. Why did you mention that, Mr. Jenkins, about that figure, that it's only £45.15?
Because I saw that as being small compared to the £21,000 that was being talked about.
Wasn't that
in the work that I'd done in a fairly limited timescale, I'd been unable to sort of track down exactly why that difference was.
Wasn't that a matter for comment by the lawyers rather than you?
Possibly it was. I don't know. As I say, I don't know what that. I'd been asked to actually look at this report, and I was agreeing with the fact that the figures were different, but I was just pointing out that the difference was only £45.
Can we go to page 17, please, and to paragraph 3.29? And this case was all about reversals, wasn't it, Mr. Jenkins?
Yes, I think it was. I
Yeah.
can't remember all the details, so I'm afraid.
And we see at 3.29, and of course the issue is, a central issue is, who was responsible for the reversals?
Yes.
Yeah. And we see Miss Ibbetson dealing with that issue, and something which perhaps undermined the assertion that that Kaya Misak had been physically responsible for the reversals. And it reads, I've summarised at Appendix G3 all reversals between 9th of September 2010, start of branch trading statement period 1, and 8th of February 2011, which I've further subcategorised by user ID and by product code. As my analysis shows, of the 248 reversals over this period, or over the period rather, 14 were made by Mr. Dennis Watson, following the audit on the 8th of February 2011. 173 were carried out under the usernames associated with Mr. Ishak, and 61 reversals were carried out under the username associated with Mr. Learcat. And you say, Gareth Jenkins agrees that there were 248 items, and with the split on a total basis as above. GJ points out that if only 4 product lines are analysed as SB21, then other than one transaction, all were carried out by undername KI001 or KIS002. BI agrees. Was this part of your expertise, to be able to identify who made the reversals?
I was identifying what the log said had been done in terms of the reversals. So I'd been looking through the transaction logs for the branch for that. As I can't remember the analysis I did now, but I had spent most of the previous evening going through the logs, looking to see what these reversals were and trying to marry them up with the what was mentioned here in the report by Miss Ibbetson.
Yeah, but that was a fact for the investigator and the prosecutor, not expert evidence from you, wasn't it? That's not part of your expertise.
That's what I'd been asked to look at.
Right. And then just finally looking at this report, could we go to page 19 and the expert's declaration? And this is the expert's declaration that Miss Ibbotson had referred to in the early part of her report, that is in accordance with Part 33 of the Criminal Procedure Rules and the Practice Direction. And could we just look at 5.12? Thank you. If we could move all of that up, thank you very much. And I understand that. And then at B, the court may at any stage direct a discussion to take place between experts. Did you understand when you had a discussion with Beverly Ibbotson that you were essentially, as two experts, discussing the issues in the case?
I was aware that I was there as an expert on understanding how the Horizon system operated.
Yeah. And at C, the court may direct that, following a discussion between the experts, a statement should be prepared showing those issues which are agreed and those issues which are not agreed, together with a summary of the reasons for disagreeing. What did you think your joint statement was about?
I think it was actually, looking at that now, I think it was fulfilling what it says at C there.
Yeah. And then at F, I've read Part 33 of the Criminal Procedure Rules and have complied with its requirements. Beverly Ibbotson is saying, as part of her declaration, that she's read Part 33 of the Criminal Procedure Rules and have complied with its requirements. She says that in the context of it being mentioned that the court can direct a discussion to take place between experts and that the court can direct a joint statement. She says, I've read Part 33 of the criminal, and she's declared this and I've complied with its requirements. Did you not wonder whether or not that was something you ought to have done?
No, I didn't, because, as I say, I was concerned about analysing the data and commenting on the technical aspects of the report, and that's all I thought that I needed to be doing.
Did you read this?
I'm not sure.
You read the report, but did you
not
sure?
The bit of the report that I was concentrating on was the analysis of the what had been taking place in the branch.
Yeah. And at G, I confirm that I have acted in accordance with the Code of Practice for Experts. Do you ever ask anybody about whether or not there might be a Code of Practice for Experts?
No, I didn't know.
You had been party to a joint statement with Charles McLachlan in Mrs. Misra's case as well, hadn't you?
Yes, I probably had.
Yeah. Mr. Beer took you to your notes on the expert report in the case of Wiley.
He did.
And you were also looking at that in February 2013, shortly before you came to consider the work of Beverly Ibbotson.
I can't remember the chronology, but I won't argue with you.
You'd received a letter from Bond Pierce at the earliest stages of your work on litigation support, before working on the Castleton case.
I had no recollection of that, but as it was established a couple of days ago, I clearly had seen that letter.
All of those documents contained the same or similar aspects to that which is contained within Beverly Ibbotson's report. You'd become familiar with the language of documents, legal preamble, format of documents. Why did it never occur to you that any of this might apply to you in your role as somebody giving expert evidence on behalf of essentially Fujitsu and Post Office?
I don't know. Clearly it should have done, but it didn't.
Is it because you knew you couldn't sign this because you weren't independent, Mr. Jenkins?
I just not thought it through.
Because you knew that you were part of the prosecution team batting for Post Office and Fujitsu?
That's how that they were treating me.
And so you couldn't sign this expert's declaration, could you?
I was never asked to.
Even if you'd looked at it, you couldn't sign it, could you?
Well, I've certainly never seen Part 33 of the Criminal Procedure Rules, and I certainly haven't seen the Code of Practice for Experts, so on that basis I definitely couldn't have signed it.
Yeah. Because you were considering matters of strategy, such as this would have been an unhelpful precedent.
I wouldn't call that a matter of strategy.
That's all I ask. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Now, where have we got to? It's, 12:53. There are potential questions on behalf of Ms. Sinclair. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Might I suggest that we break until 1:55 to 2?
Yeah,
Take those questions then.
fine. Certainly, then that's what we'll do.
Thank you very much, sir.